We are anonymous. No faces, no flags, no permission slips. And today I'm here because the universe just delivered a headline-worthy moment of poetic justice. Trump gets instant karma as bluff is called on Epstein files. Donald Trump is panicking. Not oops, I misspoke, panicking, full-on, flailing, spinning, and scrambling because his favorite tactic just backfired. Bluff, loud, threaten louder, and hope nobody calls you on it. Well, somebody called it. In public, with cameras ready. Here's what set him off. Former President Bill Clinton and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton basically said, "Oh, you want us to testify about the Epstein files? Fine. Let's do it. Let's do it publicly." And suddenly the spotlight turns. Because if you're going to drag people into the light, the obvious question becomes, hey, Donald, why don't you testify in public too? If you're so innocent, why hide? If you've got nothing to fear, why not say it under oath, live on TV, in front of the entire world? And that's where Trump's mask slips. He sits down for this exclusive NBC interview, and it goes off the rails in multiple directions at once. First, he tries a weird little pivot that almost sounds like he's auditioning for the role of Bill Clinton's biggest fan. I'm not kidding. Trump starts praising Bill Clinton, saying it bothers him that someone is going after Clinton. He says out loud, "I like Bill Clinton," and then goes even further. He claims Clinton got him, understood him, and treated him in a way Trump liked. That's not a slip, that's a tell. That's Trump openly revealing how he measures people, not by morality, not by truth, by whether they're useful to him, whether they flatter him, whether they make him feel safe. And then comes the question that makes him squirm. Democrats are saying if Clinton testifies, Trump should testify too. How does Trump respond? Like a man trying to wriggle out of a seatbelt while the car is still moving. He doesn't say, "Sure, I'll testify." He doesn't say, "Absolutely, put me under oath." He starts whining about how he's already been brought and indicted many, many times, trying to confuse legal accountability with public testimony. It's classic Trump drown the moment in grievance until the audience forgets what was asked. But the reason he can't answer cleanly is simple. The Epstein files are not going away, and the public release is only part of what exists. Multiple outlets have reported on a massive disclosure, millions of pages fueling renewed scrutiny, and political fallout both in the US and internationally. And yes, let's talk about the viral line that's been detonating across the internet, that there are more references to Donald Trump in the Epstein files than there are references to Harry Potter in all 7 Harry Potter books. It sounds absurd until you see what's being reported. At least one report citing a New York Times review says Trump's name appears more than 38,000 times in the newly released batch. Now, mention counts alone don't prove wrongdoing. They don't. But they do prove something else. The man can't pretend he's some distant stranger to the Epstein universe. He's in the orbit over and over and over again. And while Trump is sweating, the MAGA machine tries to play defense. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson gets asked point blank whether Trump should have to testify under oath if he's named so many times. And Johnson does what the whole movement does when confronted with accountability. He tries to escape the question like it's a burning building. The president submits to press inquiries every day. He says like chatting with friendly media is the same as sworn testimony. Not under oath, the reporter pushes. Exactly, not under oath. And that's the entire point. Now that same NBC interview, it wasn't only disastrous on Epstein, it was disastrous everywhere. Trump gets asked about ICE and Border Patrol operations specifically. The public outcry after 2 U.S. citizens were killed during enforcement actions in Minneapolis, a controversy widely reported in recent days. And what is Trump's big concern? Does he sound like a leader grieving dead Americans? Number. He sounds like a guy mad his ratings dipped. He frames it like 2 people out of tens of thousands, and then complains about bad publicity. Bad publicity. 2 people are dead, and he's annoyed he's getting bad press. That is not leadership. That is rot. Then he does that other thing he always does. He brags. He says he's getting great polls on the economy, and he's bringing in $18 trillion, like he's personally dragging treasure chests onto the dock. But even the reporter fact-checks him, to his face basically saying no. The economy polling isn't great, and people don't feel what you're claiming. And here's the thing. Independent fact-checking has repeatedly found Trump's multi-trillion investment secured claims to be inflated, shifting, and not supported by the way he presents them. And while he's busy trying to sell the fantasy that everything is booming, he also starts bragging about a lawsuit where he's suing the IRS and Treasury for $10 billion over the leak of his tax information. Multiple mainstream outlets have reported on this lawsuit, including details that it follows the conviction of an IRS contractor for leaking taxpayer data. But in the interview, Trump goes further. He talks like he's already won, and he suggests he'd tell the government to pay him, even though he's the president and the government is supposed to be the people's government. When the reporter points out the obvious, "You're the bossin'," Trump tries to patch it with a classic Trump Band-Aid. "I'll give it to charity." He even tosses out American Cancer Society, as if saying a charity name magically makes it clean. And the reporter pushes again. "We have 30-something trillion dollars in debt, and you're taking $10 billion out of the system." Trump hand-waves it like it's pocket change. This is what he does: privatize the public-turn institutions into vending machines, and then act offended when people notice. Then, because he can't help himself, he pivots into fraud claims pointing at Minnesota and shouting massive investigations, tossing out numbers like $19 billion in fraud, presenting himself as the one guy who could fix everything if only the country would stop asking questions about him. It's always the same script. When the spotlight hits his behavior, he points at somebody else and screams crime. And then this part is so surreal, it sounds like parody. But it's real enough that fact-checkers and doctors have had to respond. Trump starts bragging about taking aspirin all the time for decades, ignoring doctors, because he wants his blood nice and thin running through my heart. That's not how medical advice works, and public health experts have warned that his comments can confuse people about aspirin risks and benefits. But Trump doesn't care. He likes the sound of his own certainty. Now zoom out. The dominoes are falling from these Epstein document releases, and it's not just U.S. drama. Abroad, resignations and political crises are erupting. Reports say Slovakia's national security advisor resigned after disclosures tied to Epstein-related communications. In the UK, the Epstein-linked fallout has been scorching. Coverage describes how the Mandelson files rocked the government, with mounting pressure to release vetting documentation about Peter Mandelson's appointment and what officials knew. Parliamentary scrutiny intensified, and reporting describes a political storm around whether Mandelson misrepresented the extent of his relationship with Epstein during security vetting. And in the legal world, the shockwave hits big names too. AP reported that Brad Kopp, chairman of the powerhouse law firm Paul Weiss, resigned after emails revealed extensive communication with Epstein, adding to questions about influence networks and why certain institutions seemed eager to accommodate Trump. Meanwhile, back in the U.S., look at the contrast. When asked if Trump should answer under oath, MAGA leaders run. They stall. They deflect. They pretend press questions are the same as sworn testimony. And as Trump gets more desperate, the rhetoric around enforcement and elections gets darker. Steve Bannon goes on his show and says, "You're damn right we're going to have ICE surround the polls come November," framing it as preventing a stolen election. Multiple outlets reported the quote and the blowback, with even the White House press secretary refusing to clearly rule out ICE presence around polling places, which raises obvious intimidation fears. And speaking of ICE, did you see the Ace of Spades card story? Reports out of Colorado describe ICE agents leaving Ace of Spades cards widely associated with death cards and psychological warfare on vehicles connected to detained people, prompting lawmakers to raise serious questions and ICE to investigate. Now Trump also gets pressed on his history of amplifying conspiracy theories like the old Italian satellites nonsense about 2020, and he tries his usual word game escape hatch. I didn't tweet it. I retweeted it. I retruthed it. Same poison, different bottle. And then there's Tulsi Gabbard, reported to have overseen an investigation tied to yet another deranged voting machine conspiracy thread, with reporting noting the allegations were found unsubstantiated. It's a pattern. Flood the zone with conspiracies, exhaust everyone, then claim you're the victim of bad publicity. Even Melania gets dragged into the orbit of questions about Ghislaine Maxwell, and she shuts it down, saying she doesn't want to talk about it, trying to redirect attention in a moment that was supposed to be about celebrating freed hostages. That's the whole Trump world in one snapshot. Always redirect, always deflect, always not today, because today might become testimony. And while all this is happening, Trump is still running the oldest scam in his playbook, the fundraising bait and switch. Reports describe deceptive tariff rebate check emails sent under his name, teasing money, asking supporters to confirm their name before he signs the check, then funneling them into donation pages. No rebate check, just a hook, a grift, again. So let me put it plainly, as anonymous, this is what instant karma looks like in politics. Trump tried to weaponize the Epstein files as a cudgel, and now the same files are a mirror. He tried to turn public scrutiny into a circus for everyone else. And now people are saying, find public testimony for all of it, live under oath. And suddenly the loudest man in the room can't give a straight answer. If you're watching this, don't just treat it like entertainment. And today's pattern is ugly. Trump panics as his health takes a turn for worse. Not because I'm diagnosing him from a distance. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not pretending to have his medical chart, but because even in his own words, on camera in a high-profile sit-down, you can hear the strain. You can see the scrambling. You can watch the contradictions pile up in real time while he tries to bluff his way through. The most basic question a leader should be able to answer, "Are you okay?" Last night, Donald Trump gave an exclusive interview with NBC. And instead of reassuring anyone, he did what he always does when he's cornered. He bragged, he lashed out, and he tried to drown out concern with noise. He actually said he loves taking these cognitive quizzes. That's his framing, like it's a fun little game, like it's a personality test in a magazine. And then he describes it like this: I take cognitive physicals, so I do a cognitive mind test, okay? And a lot of people wouldn't be able to do very well. Not easy. You know, you get to those last questions. I've done 3 of them. No other president has agreed to do them. I do them because I have no problem with it, because I'm 100%. Let's pause right there. First, they're not cognitive mind tests in the way he's trying to sell it. These kinds of cognitive screenings are used to look for signs of impairment or decline tools clinicians can use when there are concerns about memory, attention, language, or executive function. The Montreal Cognitive Assessment, for example, is specifically discussed in clinical contexts for detecting cognitive impairment, including mild cognitive impairment, and it's widely referenced as a screening tool in that space. That doesn't mean if you take it, you're doomed. And it doesn't mean if you pass it, you're Superman. It means it's a screen, not a trophy. But Trump can't help himself. He turns anything that should be sober and transparent into a carnival act, because transparency is dangerous to him. If he admits vulnerability, he loses the strongman cosplay that keeps his base locked in. So he does this chest-thumping routine. I've aced them. No other president has agreed. He says I'm 100%, like repeating it makes it true. And then this is where it gets darker. Trump starts talking about aspirin. Not as a normal, my doctor recommended a regimen, but as an I do what I want flex. He's asked if he's still taking aspirin, and he says yes. He says, I do, I take aspirin. And I don't want to change, you know. I don't want to. The reporter presses, so you go against your doctor's orders. You do what you feel. And Trump basically confirms it. He's been taking aspirin for 30 years, and he doesn't want to change it. Then he says they tell him to take the smaller one. And he says, well, I want that blood to be nice and thin running through my heart. Do you hear the mindset? This is not I'm carefully following medical advice. This is I know better than professionals, the same poison that fueled so much chaos in public health and government. And here's the thing, daily aspirin isn't a casual vitamin. Modern guidance has tightened because bleeding risks, especially in older adults, can outweigh benefits for primary prevention. In many people, the U.S. Preventive Services Task Force, for example, recommends against initiating low-dose aspirin for primary prevention of cardiovascular disease in adults 60 and older, largely because bleeding risks increase and net benefit is small. That's not my opinion. That's clinical guidance. And Trump's on TV talking like it's a vibes-based decision. I like my blood thin. Then it gets even more surreal. Trump declares, I feel great. I mean, physically and mentally. I feel like I did 50 years ago. It's crazy. Now there'll be a time when I won't be able to give you that answer, but that time hasn't come. And he adds that he's done more physicals, that he takes physicals just to give the report out. And then the NBC reporter asks, the question that should be easy for a serious leader. If at any point your age impacts your job, who's going to tell you that? Or do you think you'll know yourself? Trump's answer, I think I'll know myself. I think I'll know myself. That's not reassuring. That's terrifying. Trust me, I'll notice if I'm slipping. Is not a plan. That's a man insisting the cockpit has no instruments because he feels fine. Now, there were other moments in that same interview and the surrounding news cycle that show the same theme, panic masked as bravado. One standout is how Trump suddenly plays this weird emotional violin about Bill Clinton. He spends years trashing Clinton and Hillary Clinton, then out of nowhere he's like, you know what? It really bothers me that that the Republicans are going after Bill Clinton. He says it hurts him. He says, I like Bill Clinton. I still like Bill Clinton. Then he's asked what he likes about him. And Trump says, I liked his behavior toward me. I thought he got me. He understood me. This is the part where the mask slips. Trump doesn't respect morals or law or country. He respects personal validation. If you understood him, you're his guy. And yes, people are asking whether he's suddenly trying to soften the ground because of what might come out when Congress digs deeper into Epstein-related records. That fear is everywhere in his orbit, and it's not subtle. We've seen him repeatedly talk about cognitive exams, as if he's trying to preempt the obvious. People can see something is off. Remember the whole milk spectacle? 2 weeks ago, out of nowhere, Trump was holding what people online were calling a press conference about whole milk. The clip that's circulating has him essentially implying milk helps cognitive ability, and then he brags, "I've taken a lot of them. I've aced every one of them because I drink milk." This wasn't just some random joke. In a vacuum, it came as he was tied to signing or promoting school milk policy again, with headlines explicitly noting his milk-to-cognition boast. That's the pattern. When pressure rises, he reaches for magical thinking, not evidence, not transparency, not humility. He reaches for a prop milk, a test score, a made-up label like cognitive mind test, anything that lets him posture instead of answer. And it's not just critics saying it. Even people who have been inside his world are sounding alarms. Former White House attorney Ty Cobb, someone who knew Trump up close during the first administration, went on with Jim Acosta and basically said it straight. Trump is not well. Cobb drew a comparison to moments when Biden appeared visibly confused in public, then said in essence, Trump is worse. He called what Trump says insane, and he framed it as far out of bounds, that people have to deal with it. Cobb also described it as dangerous, pointing to damage with allies and the fear that intelligence could be mishandled. Now the video you're hearing this from also highlights something else, Trump's behavior toward women reporters, especially when they ask about Epstein. And yes, Trump has always been misogynistic, but the concern people keep raising is the hair trigger volatility, the snapping, the impulsive cruelty, like he can't regulate himself in the moment. We saw it with CNN's Caitlin Collins. She asks about survivors who feel they haven't gotten justice, and he explodes, calling her the worst reporter, insulting CNN's ratings, and then doing that gross little personal jab. You're a young woman. I don't think I've ever seen you smile. I've known you for 10 years. I don't think I've ever seen a smile. Then he pivots to dishonest organization, ashamed the whole tantrum playbook. And this isn't isolated. There was also the quiet piggy moment aboard Air Force One when he shut down a female reporter asking about Epstein files, an incident reported widely as part of a broader pattern of attacks on women journalists who press him on Epstein. And what does Trump's cheer squad do? They sanitize it. They call it humor. They call it observant. They try to reframe blatant sexism as perceptive, like it's some charming, old-school TV producer advice, smile more. That's not leadership. That's the politics of humiliation. Degrade the questioner so you never have to answer the question. And the family members in the clip pile on. Fred Trump III, Trump's nephew, says he recognizes warning signs from what he saw in his grandfather and in Trump's older sister, Marianne. He notes dementia runs in the family, mentions a cousin with dementia, and says Trump looks older and can't stick to a message. Then Mary Trump says concerns are mounting even among Republicans. She calls him deeply unhealthy at 79. She references Fred Trump's Alzheimer's, lasting about 15 years. She says Donald seems increasingly feeble and unable to focus. She claims even the New York Times is starting to catch on. And she cites a journalist's speculation that an MRI might have influenced House members regarding Epstein file-related politics. Then it gets messier. A claim that Trump accidentally boosted a post from an account literally called "Impeach Donald for a third time," including Senator Mark Kelly's message about service members possibly needing to refuse illegal orders, framed as Trump not being able to tell allies from enemies, days from nights, propaganda from uncomfortable truth. And finally, the Epstein section. Trump insists he has nothing to do with Jeffrey Epstein, claims DOJ released 3 million pages, says only Bill Clinton and Bill Gates are in there, nothing on me, and dismisses it as something DOJ should move on from. Meanwhile, the clip references a viral meme claiming Trump's name appears 38,000 times, and even jokes it appears more than Harry Potter appears. Across the Harry Potter books, I'm going to be responsible here. Memes aren't evidence. But here's what is evidence: the pattern of Trump lashing out when asked about Epstein, the quiet piggy insult, and the continued defensive posture every time that topic comes up. So what's the story when you put it all together? A president pushing 80, bragging about acing cognitive tests while misnaming them, treating medical guidance like optional, insisting he'll personally notice if age affects his job, veering into bizarre, magical thinking about milk and cognition, contradicting himself on major government operations, and snapping at women reporters when they press on Epstein, while former insiders say the decline is palpable and dangerous, and public reporting continues to document the instability. Trump can panic all he wants. He can shout, "I'm 100% until he's hoarse. But a country isn't a rally, and the presidency isn't a reality show where confidence is a substitute for competence. I can and can't say. I don't do access journalism. I don't do both sides, when one side is lighting the Constitution on fire and calling it law and order. I show up when the system starts eating itself, when the mask slips, when the paperwork doesn't match the propaganda, when the people inside the machine start whispering the part they were never supposed to say out loud. And right now, the machine is openly malfunctioning in Minnesota because Trump's ICE has effectively turned on its own Department of Justice in a shocking move, not in a dramatic Hollywood way, in a colder, more dangerous way, by ignoring federal court orders, stonewalling DOJ lawyers, and daring the judiciary to do something about it. Here's what's happening. There's a new war front in Minnesota federal courthouses. It's ICE versus the DOJ. They're not getting along. They're not communicating. ICE isn't returning phone calls, and it's spilling into the open in real time, right in front of judges who are watching their orders get treated like optional suggestions. Multiple reports describe a surge of habeas petitions and repeated failures by ICE to follow orders to release detainees or bring them to court, prompting extraordinary judicial responses. The face of this mess, at least, the one the public heard, was a DOJ attorney named Julie Lee. You may have already seen the clip or heard the quote because it's the kind of courtroom moment you can't script. She said out loud in a hearing to Judge Blackfile that the job sucks, the system sucks, and she can't get ICE, her own client, to comply with court orders. She tells the judge it's like pulling teeth. And yes, that's being reported widely as a real courtroom breakdown, not a parody. In the original account, Judge Blackfile presses her. Why aren't my orders on writs of habeas corpus being followed? Why aren't people being released from custody or brought into the courtroom when the court orders it? And Lee's answer isn't the usual sterile government lawyer language. She basically confesses she can't force ICE to do what the court demanded. She says she's trying, but she can't do it. She says it's like pulling teeth. But there are two more facts that came out about that hearing. Two data points that make this uglier. First, Lee tells the judge she's carrying an absurd caseload. In the original story, she says she has 80 habeas corpus petition cases that were handed to her after she volunteered stupidly to do this job. Reports around the episode describe a huge volume of cases dumped on her in a short time, with little support, as the system strains under an enforcement surge. Second, and this is where it gets personal, she acknowledges she's Vietnamese American and says essentially, as you can see, I'm not white. She points to racial profiling being at the heart of many of these cases, and she's troubled because her own family is at risk. That's not a slogan. That's a government lawyer in open court, signaling that the enforcement machinery she represents is frightening enough, that she's worried it could swallow her own people too. And the Department of Justice is described as so strapped for personnel that they didn't fire her even though the judge was close to finding her in contempt. She allegedly begged to be sent to jail for contempt just to get some sleep, saying the kind of things you almost never hear from the DOJ table. And the original narrator says they just reassigned her back to ICE. Some public reporting aligns with the idea that her outburst triggered internal retaliation. DHS officials publicly condemned her conduct, and at least one major report says DHS fired her after the courtroom rebellion. So whether the internal personnel move was reassigned first and then fired, or vice versa, the key point remains the administration's answer wasn't fix compliance. It was punish the messenger. And she's not alone. Other DOJ lawyers in Minnesota, according to the original account, have told judges they're overwhelmed, that there isn't an ability to do justice, and that they can't get responsiveness from their own clients. ICE, DHS, Border Patrol, who just won't listen. Judges are throwing up their hands. The whole thing reads like a legal system being flooded on purpose, then blamed for failing to swim. Now let's zoom out. This isn't just one lawyer losing it. It's a symptom of a bigger rot. Chief Judge Patrick Schiltz of the U.S. District Court for Minnesota, and described in the original account as a right-wing conservative appointed by George W. Bush and a former clerk for Justice Antonin Scalia, issued a blistering order about ICE defying court authority. Multiple outlets report that Schiltz cataloged dozens of violations and took the extraordinary step of summoning ICE's acting director, Todd Lyons, to appear personally and explain why he should not be held in contempt. Read that again. A chief federal judge ordering the head of ICE to show up in court or face contempt because ICE keeps violating court orders. That's not normal. That's not activist judges. That's the judiciary trying to keep its spine from being snapped in public. And here's the part that should make your blood run cold. This is happening in January 2026 in Minnesota, amid what reporting describes as an aggressive immigration campaign that overwhelmed the legal system, with hundreds of habeas petitions in weeks. In January alone, there were almost 100 court orders ignored and defied by ICE. In Minnesota, more than most agencies have defied in their entire existence. Public reporting confirms that Schiltz documented widespread violations and that the scale was extraordinary, enough to justify extraordinary measures. So what do we have? We have ICE versus DOJ in open court. We have federal judges caught in the middle. We have DOJ lawyers saying they can't ethically do their jobs because their client ICE won't follow orders. And we have the Trump administration's communications machine trying to pre-bake the excuse, calling judges activists, while the record shows these orders are being issued by judges across the spectrum, including the conservative chief judge himself. And then you get to the operational reality. When leadership evaporates, when the U.S. Attorney's Office in Minnesota loses almost all of its leadership again in the original telling, and some Trumper gets appointed to calm the waters, but there aren't enough employees. So they grab people from ICE lawyers who may be inexperienced in federal habeas litigation, professionally immature, overwhelmed, and throw them into constitutional quicksand. ICE doesn't care. The courts care. The detainees' families care. And Trump cares about one thing, the image of power. Julie Lee in court reportedly said it took dozens of phone calls and even threats that she would quit to get ICE to comply with federal court orders that usually mean someone must be released from detention or brought in immediately for a bond hearing. And if those orders are ignored, what's left of the rule of law? Just vibes, just uniforms, just fear. Judge Schiltz, according to both the original telling and mainstream reporting, is moving toward contempt proceedings against Todd Lyons because of ICE's wholesale abuse of the federal judiciary. That matters because contempt is one of the only blunt tools courts have when an executive agency decides it's above the law. Now let me speak, anonymous to you, citizen to citizen, and yes, lawyer to lawyer, the way the original narrator did. If you're a government lawyer and you're in a situation where you can't do your job ethically, where your client is pushing you to ignore court orders, or to drag your feet, or to play games with custody transfers, you are not just doing your job. You are an officer of the court. You are sworn to uphold the Constitution. You are bound by professional responsibility rules. You can lose your law license for being the instrument of a client whose independent judgment has been compromised. And while this courtroom war is erupting, the enforcement push is also creeping into spaces it has no business terrorizing, like schools. The original account mentions a new federal lawsuit involving Democracy Forward and Sky Perryman's group, aimed at stopping ICE enforcement in and around public schools to stop scaring children and parents. And that's not just talk. On February 4th, 2026, a lawsuit in Minnesota sought to keep immigration enforcement away from schools, with plaintiffs describing fear, disrupted attendance, and enforcement activity near school properties. Because here's the moral line: if you genuinely needed, legitimately, in good faith, to pick up someone who violated immigration laws or committed crimes, you have options. You don't need to stalk school zones, bus stops, or spaces where children are supposed to be safe. Yet the allegations in that school-related lawsuit describe enforcement actions near schools and communities reporting sharp drops in attendance because families are terrified. This is what Trump does. He doesn't just enforce laws, he weaponizes fear. He doesn't just stretch institutions, he breaks them, and then points at the wreckage and says, "See, government doesn't work." He turns agencies into brands, uniforms into props, human beings into numbers, and judges into enemies. And when his own DOJ lawyers can't even get ICE to pick up the phone, the truth is obvious. This isn't governance. It's chaos as a strategy. So what's the power of a federal court to fix this? The original narrator answers bluntly. Start holding people in contempt. Start issuing orders to show cause. Drag leadership from DOJ, Border Patrol, DHS, into court. Call them out. Threaten jail if they keep defying the judiciary. And yes, Chief Judge Schiltz has already taken steps in that direction by ordering ICE's acting director to personally appear and show cause why contempt shouldn't follow. That's all the original detail. And I'm repeating it for one reason, because what's happening in Minnesota isn't just a story. It's a warning. It's a bright red flare that says the Trump administration's immigration apparatus is so reckless, it's now colliding with its own lawyers, its own judges, its own constitutional boundaries, and it's still accelerating. If you're watching this and thinking, that can't happen here, it already is. It's happening in January and February 2026, in real courtrooms, in real dockets, with a conservative chief judge ordering ICE leadership to explain themselves. Don't look away. Don't normalize it. Share this. Talk about it. We are anonymous. We are watching, and we do not forgive. We do not forget.